Court, who is a barrister working within the family law sector based in the Newcastle region. Thank you so much for joining us, Rebekah.
My pleasure.
A lot of people might be wondering if they aren't experienced with the legal system and already have a solicitor, what is a barrister and why would I need one?
A barrister is someone who almost exclusively does court work. And what I mean by that is someone who can speak on a client's or party's behalf in a courtroom. Most of the time, that means more serious appearance work, like appearing in a family law trial or family law hearing. And that can occur at the early stages of a family matter for an interim hearing or throughout the matter's life. And definitely at the final hearing, that's predominantly where you will find barristers appearing in family law matters. In the life of the matter, there are very some serious things that do come up from time to time, and that's when a solicitor may ask for the direct input of a barrister for advice to direct and guide the matter.
Okay, so that sounds like that word advocacy or advocate that is used in the legal world. That's what a barrister is, somebody who advocates, so stands up in court to speak on behalf of their client in a very expert way.
That's right. And that's not to diminish from a lot of advocacy work that gets done by solicitors in the early stages of a matter. There is a lot that can go on from an administrative perspective that solicitors are very capable at appearing on, but the barrister is the specialist, if you like. It's the difference between a general practitioner and an orthopaedic surgeon, if you will.
Okay, and that specialty area is arguing cases in court and understanding the rules of evidence, so what can be said in court and what evidence can be admitted into court or not?
Yes, that's right. And also a lot of barristers regularly appear in front of the same judges. So you're also, when you're engaging a barrister, you're engaging their relationship with the court and maybe even engaging their relationship with that particular judge.
Okay, and I'm hearing you say that solicitors are really capable and well equipped to deal with a huge range of issues in a family law matter and even many of the court appearances. Is there a certain stage within a family law case or a certain moment in which a barrister should be engaged or should at least be thought about being brought into the case?
No, I've been involved with matters that aren't even in court yet, that are being thought of very early by the solicitor and the client, even as early as where there are discussions going backwards and forwards between an ex-husband and an ex-wife, for example, in a property matter. Sometimes even drafting up important letters at the very early stage is something a barrister may be involved with if it involves some technical questions. Or I've been involved in matters where I've received the brief 1 week away from the final hearing, and that's just as normal.
Okay, so it could be, from the sounds of things, a worthwhile investment for somebody to bring a barrister in really early to give a detailed advice the way you described, to set out like a roadmap for the case and prompt the solicitor in what they should be doing to prepare the case, and then have the barrister sit back and not do any work for quite a while the matter churns along, and then bring the barrister in at the median, so to speak, when it's closer to the final hearing date.
Yes, or even just to have that relationship there from the early stage between the client and the barrister and the solicitor. So if there is a flash point or a trigger point in the hearing, because anything can happen and it usually does, that's where having that barrister's knowledge of the matter already on hand is so vital. And it can actually make all the difference. Now, not everyone can necessarily afford to have a barrister on that early. My argument would be that it saves money in the long run rather than costs more, because I think that a a barrister who is minded about the principles, particularly in family law, of mediating and coming to a resolution can be a far cheaper option than waiting to the last minute to brief a barrister and running all the matter all the way through to a final hearing, sometimes with not always a terrific result. So it's a big cost benefit analysis that needs to be done by particularly the solicitor and the client in those very early stages of the matter.
Okay, great. And speaking about costs, what sort of how are costs for barristers managed in a family law matter?
Generally speaking, we rely on our relationship with the solicitor to tell them our hourly or our daily costs. Those are generally revised and updated every year. We have that relationship directly with the solicitor. It's not something that we have a relationship directly with the client about. The solicitor is almost seen as our middleman in that particular transaction. That's because barristers aren't, unless they qualify for a specific exemption, aren't necessarily required or allowed to hold funds waiting for a matter to start or get on. That's really a solicitor's job. So it really is something the solicitor would then talk to the client about in a discussion about, well, these are the costs if we get our barrister involved. These are the costs if it's just me. And once the client has made the decision of whether or not to go ahead, then the solicitor would then sit down and walk through what's called a costs agreement with the client and talk about the various costs involved in the matter. And that transaction then goes from there between the two of them before the barrister then gets involved.
Okay, thank you. And then one thing we didn't mention is that it's rare, isn't it, that a client would approach a barrister directly. That relationship usually does have that middle person, as you described, the solicitor.
Yeah. To help everyone out there understand, on the New South Wales Bar Association website, every barrister, when they're updating their membership details, is asked to tell the Bar Association whether or not we will be accepting what's called direct access briefs. And that's where we don't have a solicitor involved. It's just between the client and the barrister. It is very rare that a barrister would take that on, but the public information is available on the New South Wales Barristers Find a Barrister website, and their profile, the individual barrister, will tell you whether or not they will accept direct briefs.
Okay, wonderful. And then the last thing I wanted to touch upon is this idea of bringing in a barrister with a fresh perspective. So let's say the barrister is briefed later in the life of a case. One thing we haven't really discussed is not just that the barrister can appear in court and bring that level of expertise, but also that they're a fresh pair of eyes. So what can that do for a case?
I think that the benefit of that is a couple of things. I think there's an ability to perhaps, rather than delve into all the historical reasons of why things have happened to date, instead that person's able to look forward and perhaps consider adjusting the course somewhat for the client and the solicitor so that there can be a better result. There can also be, obviously there's a lot of fatigue involved in very lengthy family law matters, and that's the case for everyone. If a fresh barrister comes into it, they are coming in full of vigour, full of interest, and full of intention to negotiate, mediate, and come to a great result for the client, hopefully without having to run trials that are unnecessary. So it's a good chance for everyone to dust themselves off and reconsider the goals at the present time and the best outcome for the client.
Okay, that's all so insightful. Thank you so much for your contribution, Rebekah.
My pleasure.